For those of you who have gone beyond dial a prayer, perhaps progressed beyond the psychic hotline and maybe even the sex lines. New intelligence, we're proud to be able to present to you a new service, Dial-A-Dope. Where if you phone us for only $3.99 per minute, we will guarantee that you will speak to somebody dumber than you are. One man's past used to call him up on the gene phone and say, "Hello, DNA here, to whom am I speaking?" And damn if he wasn't always stuck for an answer. Not only is a more alert man's mind his own favorite performer, he is also its best audience. The speaker said, "Most people just live from the waist down." And someone asked, "Does that include those who try not to?" "Yes," he replied, "yes." A parallel historical tracking of education and human hormones. All schools were once one-roomed, back when all students were one-eyed. And when was that, Teach? Just look down in your pants, Bobby, and you'll know. Oh, you mean metaphorically, you metaphorically mean to look back in my past. True communication between instructor and student is a beautiful thing indeed, matched only perhaps in comeliness by that of, forget comparisons, it's just a beautiful thing. Man has a brain divided in two parts so that anything he can think, he can also think the opposite. Most talkers' main hobby is stupidity. Oh, all right, I guess I can be nicer. Is discussing stuff. One man's advice to his brother-in-law's oldest boy: never bump a nervous man with a gun or a stupid one with your fate in his pocket. It is believed that this counsel in later years saved the lad from a number of meaningless memberships in many well-known organizations. Philosophical conversations circa 1700 and up to now. I join, therefore I am. Contraire, Pierre, you join, therefore you cease to be. Oh, I see. And a chap in bright breeches, hanging about under a tree, hailed us down to declare, "I do so regret, y'all, that I have no more to contribute in the ongoing development of my own consciousness but my own off-winning past old self." And the hooded one standing by assured him that this was quite sufficient. For his own health, one guy would force himself to appreciate any non-physical thing that he found himself wanting to criticize. As regards routine areas of routine mysticism, after the experience that is beyond all description, what can the mind of a non-relentless mystic later do but begin to deal in specific terms and descriptions? Transcendental experience tied to rites and symbols has become more dental than trans. Now switching from sports to the farm report. If you blink, you miss it. But if you don't initially blink, you run the risk of going nuts. Heads up, Alfonso. Watch out for those goofy flying pigs. And of your rights, what is the difference between constraint and relentless? Sir, even a sissy can be restrained. Our Mr. Meany Award for the week goes to the guy who said, If you can make somebody think you're so stupid that they actually get mad at you, it's better than popping them in the mouth. And now over to our international news desk for this late-breaking story. That's correct, the grand, ultimate, supreme, and final worldwide conspiracy is in life making most people believe that things are far dumber and stupider than they really are. Say, Biff, you think we better check ourselves in this regard? I don't know, Wally. Might not be so wise. You're probably right, Biff. Let's just go on to the South American stock market report. Venezuelan light and water closed today at 84 1/4. Men have two eyes so they won't notice that they don't have one. How to handle the problem of life wanting everyone to take up some sort of city job. If I don't call them and they don't call me, then me and myself can stay on a spree. A chap standing in line at the donut truck turns and asks, does this by any chance also have to do with the mind's relationship to the ideas normally available to people on an everyday basis? Sociology from our classroom of the surprising. All crime is hormonal directed, that is, survival threatening, and is thus not funny. And as thus it is that taking it to be so, and thus it is that taking it to be more and less than it is. Yes, I'll reread it. You know, you're going to do that one too many times. All crime is hormonal directed, that is, survival threatening, and is thus not funny. And thus it is that taking it to be more and less than it is. On this one planet were two distinct groups of creatures. The first could laugh at death, while the other could only do so at illness. Why do you think a planet would go to all of the trouble to divide up its beings into all of those little dichotomous bunches? Anyway, more show business news. When a more alert man wants to see a performance, he doesn't care what kind of preparation was required to put it on. Daddy? Son, are you about to ask me if this is also how a more conscious man would approach his efforts to be even more conscious? Yeah, Dad, something like that. Not only are ordinary minds' opinions on popular subjects spurious, but their selection of topics is a waste of time. A more active mind's only comment regarding man's routine affairs would be, no comment. Viewer, didn't you already do that one once before? Yeah. Me. Yes, but you weren't listening. Viewer, are you sure? Me. Yes, that's why I get to write all this. Viewer. Oh. One Friday morning, one man's brain began to sing. Oh, being pedantic has made me frantic, but not enough so to make me shut up. Later, while cutting himself, he accidentally shaved. Men have two ears, so as one can say hello, and the other one mutters, screw you. The dumb like to think of themselves in the plural. Hence the invention of the words men and humanity, when me or silence would have done just as well, at least for a few. Definitions. Psychologist, priest without collars. Okay. Psychologist, priest with only layman's power of absolution. All right, Mr. and Miss, I still ain't satisfied. Adult version of TGIF, thank God it's Friday, the new version. TGID, Thank God I'm dying. The early morning drill one father laid on his son. Remember, young trooper, as you head out there today, as bad as engaging in criticism is, reacting to it, worse. Now go get them, but don't let them know it. You stay right there. How the ordinary see progress in fashion and the few in something else. As cows become civilized, they feel proof thereof to be in the development of udder covers. The chic interplay between the body and the mind, between hormones and neurons, as interpreted through observations regarding the sale of farm properties. If the barn is ugly, point to the smokehouse. Begging for extrapolation. Extrapolate that. Secret knowledge retains its potency only so long as you don't talk about it. The heretofore uncodified, unrecorded, true basis of all religion on one planet. A weak man's a happy man if he knows he's weak. The previously unnoticed foundation of how conscious creatures stay as they are. A dumb man's a satisfied man, if he's not told otherwise. And the usually ignored viewer asks, but if man is truly dumb, would just telling him that he was actually make any difference? Well, no, but still, how would he know? And the viewer suddenly begins to sweat and stagger and says that he feels a bit weak. No. Moral. What goes around comes around, unless it never comes around. Men have two legs, soles they can rock from one to the other, giving the illusion of forward motion. Definition from the cutting edge, watch your fingers, Jim Bob. Life. Wrapping up the loose ends for dying. Daddy, how come there ain't no Austrian philosophers named Billy Lee Osmosis? Chuckle, chuckle, went the old man just before he replied, my boy, your questions continue to follow an upward trajectory, becoming either increasingly transparent or porous. Now for some cultural news. One reason the Philistines dislike artists is that artists seem not to be under the domination of some personal sense of time. On this one planet, they set aside a yearly celebration of National Dumb Day. But those qualified to participate therein were too dumb to know it. Advanced version. But all those qualified to participate therein were too ashamed to do so. And I don't expect any of you partygoers would care to take this any further. Corollary to an earlier item regarding hormones and supernatural beliefs. A weak wolf's a happy wolf if a member of a pack, while alpha males in their head have no religious dreams. You lay over there near that one about conspiracy, okay? You stay right there. At the far end of the counter were two guys in the sitting and coffeeing mode. And one of them said, the great thing about drugs is that they'll keep your mind from talking to you. And that one replied, I've never found that to be the case. And the first one puzzled on this for a sip or two and responded, maybe I should say that certain drugs are neat in that they help exaggerate certain things that your mind wants to talk to you about. The same guy, oh, yeah, right. A cost-conscious consumer's corollary. when you can think for and thus serve yourself beyond the open 24 hours a day limits of the city's collective corner cafes, when you depart therefrom, you don't have to leave a tip. One man, as he increasingly became a new kind of strange adult, would periodically peek into the diapers of his own mind, hold his nose and demand, "Okay, which of you smart-ass neural bowel movements left me this self-serving doo-doo souvenir?" Daddy, is a souvenir anything like a tip? It won't go down. I've heard that before. Not in a public forum, but next. We're going to have to get a new laugh track here. Next to his bathroom mirror, where he had placed a sign that said, "My hero," one man installed a lie detector. And a viewer writes, "Why do you always say bedroom mirror instead of bathroom mirror?" Oh, you did say bathroom. Never mind. In an attempt to placate, if not actually reward, this one guy, local conditions offered him this choice. He could either be manic depressive or else just manic. When most everybody's dumb, it becomes, well, hardly noticeable. No problem turning that one loose. The great neural experience, sometimes known as the great mystical experience, is nothing less than the adult confrontation with point-blank reality. If you can't move on, you're going to die. Everyone's going to die. So why not go on and move on? Viewer, ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies. Me, I didn't ask you anything. Viewer, that's okay, I'll lie to you anyway. Me, thanks. Viewer, you betcha. Men have two parents so that neither one will have to take all the blame. A thinking man's thumbnail guide of how to measure, how to calculate. Reality, universal. Criticism, local. More history of lit in a snit. Books came about because men had titles and nothing to put them on. And some thoughts said, yeah, we had a similar problem till we discovered man. No. Socializing, re-sliced and examined. The dense like to hang out together. The more alert, not necessarily so, but who else they got? No. The National Friendly People Society registers their strongest possible complaint hereto. Hereto, come here, boy. Once a myth becomes public, it becomes impotent. Imitation and the pursuit of intellectual victory. That's victory. The mind left to lay siege to windmills and water wheels, since it has no one else to attack. Distinction by way of residency comparison. Consciousness, the Elysian fields. Mere thinking, Fidget City. Yeah. Out of sheer desperation do men become adults. Personality, how it goes. Title, how it goes. Personality is habit. Habit memory, ergo personality memory. And a guy says, I sure do wish I could disremember myself better. Extraordinary mythical efforts reconsidered, or how things could go. Instead of a way to do things, one guy just did things. One day, while tinkering about in the palace's basement, one workman was singing to himself as he worked and manned. Oh, it's a bummer to be a plumber, but at least it's better than being king and having to dress up like a fairy and pretend to like stuff you really don't. And from upstairs came the voice of His Grace saying, I heard that. Oral legends re-oralified. When men would begin to become too philosophical in this one kingdom, life would have local conditions either bring on a natural calamity, such as an earthquake or tidal wave, or else it would lift up its blouse and flash some tits. Either way, the job got done. Instead of run-of-the-mill diseases, one man had sunspots. And finally, men have two nipples for the same meaningless reason that they could have one. But Daddy, I thought all this time we weren't actually talking about man's physical senses, but something more metaphorical. Well, son, I can sure understand your surprise and disappointment, but that's the kind of thing that can happen to you when you hang around places like this. Like what, Dad? Well, places where they're prone to throw reality at the wall and symbolism into a blender. I'm thinking. Now, what the hell? If you recall last time I was trying to get you to consider the whole idea, all the kinds of examples and dreams and imaginary notions of some great kind of secret work going on in life. And I was pointing out how religion was a widespread, crude, non-operative version thereof, and that how, in fact, all public versions are not thereof, and why they are public, and why, in one functional sense, there is no such thing as some kind of great secret operation going on, never has been. It's going on, but it's not secret, you see. But for people to get involved, for people to pick up a new hobby instead of those who can't afford a guitar or have no talent, they will pick up some sort of mystical interest. They will pick up the attempt to pursue some sort of great mystical, secret practice of some kind. There is a corollary I would suggest to you, now that I think about it. I just thought about that. Between that and the idea also of great conspiracies. The item tonight that evidently I wrote, since it was in the stack of them that I was standing here reading, that said, among other possibilities, since I've mentioned others before, that the grand, yes, the grand, great, final, supreme conspiracy could be of life simply having people believe that things are dumber and stupider than they really are. Before we have milk and cookies, would you like, could we have one of these show of hands? Would anyone admit that they see any corollary between what I've said thus far, between those first two items? If so, you can have my share of the cookies. Well, I was going to pull in even a third one of criticism. You recall, those of you that are able to recall and heard it, I was also last time pointing out how all the myths, those that you could say were we would assume, for the sake of talking about that, they were the original telling, the original verbal detailing, the original verbal outline of secret knowledge at some time. All the ideas, the stories from the Old Testament, the stories of Buddha, of Confucius, the Greek dramas, the cave paintings, that they were all at some time, you could look at them as being a myth, because anything that man talks about, all literature, all art, all culture, all civilization in a sense, is a myth, in that it is invented, it is contrived, it is a conjecture, it is an invention of man. So in that sense, it is mythical to start with. But myths, if they survive, will not survive as myths. Notwithstanding the fact that somebody will pop up here and there and say, well, I don't believe the Bible for a minute. It was some kind of allegory. You know, one guy can say that, but what I want you to understand, just to use the Bible or the Hindu literature, anything, if it survives enough that it becomes a part of the mainstream of a given time and place, it is taken to be much more than myth. Now, I know still that people will play around and say, well, maybe some of it's allegorical, such as, well, how about the New Testament? The prevailing view is that parts of it are literally true. Well, I guess a better telling from their way of, the way they tell it, is the whole thing's true, except some of it was meant allegorically, such as things that Jesus said. In other words, they cover themselves by saying, well, part of the history, part of the Upanishads, part of the Mahabharata, was allegorical. You know, some of it was obviously a historical fact, but sometimes when they talk about the gods fighting these great spirits, you know, maybe it was allegorical. It was all allegorical. It was all mythical. But once it becomes assumed to be otherwise, then whatever it represented is done for. Or you can turn it around, that was done for is why it became no longer mythical. It became taken as some sort of fact, some sort of historical detailing. And I was pointing out that one way that you could do it, to try and give you a backdoor glance at something, is all you've got to do is take any myth and add the element of criticism. That's what I was calling it last time. And once you do that, the myth is done for. That you can take all the stories of Moses receiving words from God, of Buddha being blown away and realizing what the universe is, and he tries to tell a few people, and as soon as he dies, and these guys got trying to make a living out of it, there's always an element of criticism added. The obvious one being the Ten Commandments. How about that? If I didn't make it clear enough last time, that's just a beautiful example to use, is that Moses goes up, has the experience, realizes what life is, comes back down the mountain, back down the nervous system. He's back in the basement. He's back being a plumber. And he comes back, and what is he down here with? Now that he's back in the basement, now he's back at the level of everybody else, he suddenly realizes, wait a minute, I got a bunch of commandments here. Now, I didn't waste my time. The experience, the mystical experience, that is talking to God, I think Jehovah spoke to him. Rather than going back and having an adult confrontation with point blank reality, which is what it was, and it's staying there, he came back down like most people do. But when he came down, the myth was no longer prevailing. It was no longer operational. It was no longer sufficient because it produces no ordinary level of memory. It's why people clutch and scream and won't take drugs. And worse than that, write a book. A big book. My mystical experience. You know it's true. It's not irony. It's not sarcasm. I threw it in one more time tonight. I didn't pull it out, but the one about, at the ordinary level, routine mystics, whatever the hell that would be. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's a one-time mystic. I know it seems to be oxymoronical to start with, a routine mystic, an everyday mystic. Yeah, there are such things. The library's full of them. Well, they're droppings. But here's the thing. An ordinary mystic, somebody has a one-shot deal, a one-shot experience. They all describe it. They would all buy my words if we dug them up out of the grave that ain't the experience. It's that which is absolutely indescribable. They say yes. And so what do? They describe the mother at length. Those big old fat books. Other than the reference department in the library where they got all those books you can't check out anyway, all the dictionaries and encyclopedias and all that. If you want to see anything matching that, and usually the reference section is at the far end after the Dewey Decimal System. But it balances out. I'm always talking about spectrums and all. The big fat books are over here in the reference at that end. The other big fat books, the ones that match it, are where? Over here in those first few Dewey Decimal numbers of I had a mystical experience on a flying saucer. The occult section, the mystical section. Big old fat books of a guy describing the undescribable. But see, it's not just sarcasm. It's the way I put it to you tonight, trying to quote myself, but what else is an ordinary mind to do? An ordinary routine mystic, once they've had the experience and have experienced the indescribable. And they'll all say it. It's just indescribable. God. Well, tell us about it. Okay, I will. What else can it do? They start off apparently trying to do it a bit better because they will deal what sounds to be in the beginning with myth, with allegory, rites, symbols, practices. They'll say, well, it was indescribable. And they have a group of people who are interested because there's always groups of people interested. And they say, well, that's what we've always wanted. And you say, well, what can I tell you? Because normally when they start talking, they'll fall back on their predecessors. Muhammad will quote Jesus, and Jesus quote Buddha. More or less. They might give them credit. I mean, the copyright laws were pretty lax back then anyway. But at any rate, they start trying to use descriptions that's already been used. In the beginning, they sound rather mythical. They sound allegorical. They're intended to be. But that will not. An allegory is worse than a satire. To not mix metaphors, but mix showbiz stories, jokes. It used to be, what's a satire? It's a play that closes on Saturday. In other words, it's a doomed failure, is what satire is in most places. There's another one. You didn't catch the connection? All right. What's a myth out in the general public? What's an allegory? A great one. What is a myth? It's something that'll turn into shit in about a month. Something that'll turn into a cartoon. Something that'll turn into history in 100 years. It's all the same thing. If it's going to survive, it will no longer be the satire. The satire has to become serious. The comedian has got to start taking on serious roles. The myth will become mud. The myth will begin to be taken, if it survives. Now, many of them would just disappear. Which in a sense, if you want to get interesting again, they are the only successful myths, the ones you never heard of. Because if they were successful at that level, they never made it into the popular parlance. They never became part of the normal literature. So that's how you can tell when you recognize a real myth, a real one, is that you'll never see it. Is anyone taking notes besides me? The rest of them, if they have any life, if they have legs, if the myth is going to survive and be retold and become part of human literature and culture and oral traditions, written traditions, then it is no longer a myth. It's just the way it works. So you've got that, but what I wanted you to consider was you've got to add criticism. And the criticism is any element that attacks the human condition. That's the 10 Commandments. Moses goes up, using all this allegorical again, because I certainly don't mean it historically. But Moses goes up in his own nervous system, goes up on a mountain above the level where all the people, himself, not all the people, there's no condemnation there, all the people's in you. Anybody that looks around to go, my God, what's the world coming to? You got no idea what the world's coming to. There's nowhere to look. Stay home, take off your clothes, sit in the middle of the floor. You don't have to turn on the TV and see about the problems and the violence and the uncivil behavior in our neighborhoods. You are your neighborhood. So Moses went up in his own nervous system, up on a mountaintop, and had the experience. now that's taken, though, as being a literal fact, is all the stories that whatever the people were doing, worshiping false gods, engaging in all kinds of debauchery, being uncivilized, unspiritual, uncultured. They were just going to the dogs. Of course, they weren't going to the dogs have always been there. But at any rate, that doesn't make a story any good. It has to be always as though the tide is about to go out on us. In other words, even ordinary people won't go through this stuff and give the illusion of forward movement unless there's the stories that, wait a minute, regression, possible de-evolution is right behind you. So at least you got to keep giving this illusion because we're on the verge of always going backwards. I thought it'd be worthwhile to go through that. At any rate, so here you have a Moses, a one guy. It's not that his nervous system is any worse than it was, but you got to say it is or it doesn't sound right. I was going to let this go, but now you got me stuck here. No, you're missing it. You realize all the stories, not just Moses, but everybody. You know, Jesus, Buddha, everybody. They looked around. The stories always start out that here was these guys that had some kind of divine spark or some kind of great hunger, and they looked around at some point in their life, and they became routinely adult. Came to their ordinary senses, became a recognized ordinary citizen of their time and place, and they look around and realize civilization is slipping away. Therefore, I will go up on a mountain. I will go off into the woods. I will retreat. I will leave this and go off to find myself, go have the experience. But you understand, it always is that things are worse. Things are not worse. There is a purpose to this. That's why I'm stopping here. People won't try to change unless they think, hey, I've got to finally change. I'm getting worse. If you think, what shall I pick up? All right, somebody who drinks. And they drink, let's just say, X amount, like a fifth a day. For them to ever try to stop, under just general conditions, they have got to think that their drinking, the effects of their drinking, is becoming worse. We're speaking allegorically, you understand. A man, he's been drinking, he's 30 years old. You still don't, listen quick, I was going somewhere else. But we can always, he's been drinking since he was 15. His friends tell him, his doctor tells him, you shouldn't drink a fifth of booze a day. And he even says, yeah, you're right. He doesn't know anybody who drinks that much. And he has trouble sometimes getting up, his memory, all the little things that just ordinarily happen. If he stayed at that level, if a guy drinks a fifth a day, and he started when he was 15, now if he's just ordinary, physically, genetically, and we'll assume he's just part of the middle class, and he does that kind of thing, then somewhere along the line, if he's going to live out his days, and let's assume that whoever I'm talking about, that we know, it's already a known fact that he's probably going to live based upon his past, the genetics of his family tree, up to the age of 60. So somewhere along there, we know this for a fact, he's going to stop, right? Boy, we should have got it the first time around. Somewhere along the line, let's say that usually the man's going to have to stop and get serious somewhere around 40. That, my God, what's 15 from 40? 25 years of heavy drinking, that's enough. Come on. But if he stays at this one level, whatever the deleterious effects are having on him, if it just stays here, the shakes are no worse, the hangovers are no worse, the memory loss, it just stays here, a man would never stop. Remember, we're speaking metaphorically. Don't worry about literally. He would never try to stop. He has to believe. It has to become apparent. When I say belief, I don't mean imagination. It has to be that his liver does begin to actually swell. It has to be that now he blacks out and can't remember things for days at a time. It's got to be now that he can't even hold it. You understand? It's got to apparently be worse for the man, anybody go, well, I got to stop this. I didn't mean to make it too extreme by picking alcohol. How about somebody who decides I'm overweight? What if they're 2 pounds overweight, 5 pounds overweight, as far as they're concerned, and as far as the charts are concerned? And if they stay there for 20 or 30 years, and the doctor says, you could stand to lose a few pounds, thinking, yeah, you're right, I know I could. He'll never try. Somewhere along the line, it's got to be that he finally goes in for a checkup or steps on a scale, and it says, the card says, we only weigh one person at a time. got to get worse. It's got to be, he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor says, my God, from the last yearly checkup, you were 5 pounds overweight for years. I remember, I've been looking at you're suddenly 40 pounds. He goes, you're right. I got Moses looked around, and the people are just going to hell. It's just getting worse. Used to, the people are fairly good. Man, good people, bad people. But now the whole group, they're losing their damn minds. And so he goes up. But remember, an individual's got to believe. An ordinary person, not a good mystic. See, because a good mystic doesn't have a system, and he doesn't have any real impetus. He's not like everybody else that they say, well, when do you want to have a mystical experience? And the routine mystics go, I'll tell you why. That's another way you can tell that you're not dealing with a real mystic, because the real one wouldn't answer you, see. That's like the way to tell real myths when you see them, is you'll never see them. Or when you hear them. When you hear them, because you never hear the real ones. For you to hear them, they've got to become unreal. They've got to become doo-doo. They've got to become fact. So real mystics, if you find anybody that appears to be engaged or interested in that kind of great secret activity, and you go, are you engaged in it? Are you interested in it? And maybe the guy weakens. Or maybe it's a trick. Maybe he goes, maybe. And you go, well, assuming you are. He says, okay, we'll assume I am. Why are you interested? If he goes, well, he ain't one. Because if you got a reason, I'm sorry, you've become history. You're no longer a myth. At any rate, notice how the story. Moses had to look around and go, well, this is just too much. This is just absolutely too much. The people are overweight. They're drinking too much. I got to go. So he goes up and has the experience. The indescribable, unbelievable, adult confrontation with reality. Again. But except this time, he's got some idea what it's about. It's why it's now of some use and importance, whereas the original was not. Well, I say it was not. And if you'd like to debate that, if you remember my story, then I'd have to ask you, well, if it was, then why'd you blink? Because if it really was and you knew what you were doing then, you would have leaped off that assembly line belt and you would have grabbed it live. They would have had to, get away from you like a bunch of foreigners at a bar looking for a woman. We won't go into that. There seems to be people hanging on me. He goes up. He has the experience. He comes back down the mountain. But remember in the history, they say it literally. He goes up on the mountain, has the experience, and then comes back down the mountain. Now, I'm telling you what it really was. He went up in his nervous system, had the experience, and then he came back down. He's falling back down to the level of his ordinary Philistinian self. He comes back down, and it's like, well, what have I got to show for this? I mean, it was so great, but now it's gone. My memory can't even really bring it back. He comes back with what? Criticism. No. Well, they call it the 10 Commandments. Well, what the hell is it? It's nothing but a bunch of, oh. Of course, if you take it as history, you say, well, hey, it makes sense because things weren't good down there in the valley with the ordinary, his people in the city where he lived. That's why he went up to try and, cleanse his senses or to get in touch with the universe and have a cosmic confrontation. So certainly he knew things weren't right, or he wouldn't have wanted to go have the experience. Yeah. So what's the big deal that he came back with a certain amount of criticism? He left with criticism. That's what the story said. And that's why I'm telling you it's a lie. If he was a real mystic, because it's not criticism of life that'll ever get you there. So here it comes back. And all it takes to turn a myth, all it takes to turn the secret work, if there was one, into a non-secret work, or into a visible form of, well, here's the great secret work. Where? Well, here we'll describe it. Here's the history of it. All you've got to do is take whatever happened originally. That's why I'm calling the myth. That would have been the real confrontation, the adult confrontation on one person's part with reality again. All you've got to do then is add criticism. You don't have to add water, hamburger helper. All you got to do is add any critical element. And you don't know, but now why I keep using the word critical. Critical element is even larger. Now hell, it's that large at least. Well, yeah, that's not exaggerating. It's that large. It's talk. It's everything that's not metaphorical. It's everything Remember the two literatures I described. It's everything that describes man as he is. If you describe man as he is, by anybody's view, not mine, anybody's view. Whoever it is, Moses, St. Paul, Buddha, Kant, and his brother, you know the other joke. If you describe man as he is, it is impossible for it not to be, in part, critical. It's just the way it is. The only other possible literature would be myths. Before they became history, before they became taken as fact, because the myths have to do with what man could be. That's why they're so fascinating, even in their crude form, even after they fall into the grubby hands of the Philistines, of the hoi polloi of us everyday people. Well, you everyday people. I was using the royal inclusive doo-doo term of we. That's the inverse of a king, by the way. That's a king who's no longer upstairs. He's now being a plumber's helper, in case you want to put all that together. That is why fairy tales, that is why you can read oftentimes a religion foreign to you, one that in which you that you were not raised. In other words, Christians can go back and read Hindu literature, or Hindus could read Jewish literature, and it strikes them because they don't have the same kind of background, that they are fascinating. And they even seem to give one, especially those who would at least are routine mystics, it will give one the tingles, literally. They go, ooh, this is what's been missing in my religion or my culture or my nation or my race or my culture's literature and tales. This is what's been missing. The myth, the point of that was that if you hear a foreign myth, it can appear to be more mythical than your local ones. Since I used Moses, if you had a Jew somewhere who had the hunger to be at least a routine mystic, he would pick up Buddhist literature and find it more mythical than the story of Moses. But some kid sitting over in India that had a hunger to be a mystic and knew all about the story and the legends of Buddha, except they're not taking his legends and stories over there anymore, if he suddenly stumbled across an Old Testament and read the story of Moses, he'd go, and he'd realize, only a few hundred miles away is what I've been looking for. This. Because you do not have the same kind of background to take it as fact, as history. I did all that to show you that even ordinary people, in a sense, understand that there is a potential tinglingness to stories and myths and fairy tales, but it seems to be spotty. It doesn't seem to be consistent. That is, the more it is foreign to them, the more it seems to have the capacity to tingle, to fascinate. All of the fascination of it is, if you're not so laden down with that kind of cultural or established baggage that you already take the story of Moses as being true, or if you're in India, you take the story of Buddha and his birth and his enlightenment as being fact. If it's not that, then what you hear, what you sense in the myths of all kinds is a telling, a hinting, a pointing at what man could be. And that can't be a great secret. You read the myths all the way from Buddha, what he said, to things that Moses said, to the Arthurian chivalrous legends. All of them, and if you read in a certain way, and you are not already taking them as fact, that you just stumble across it and you don't have any basis of taking it fact, it's just, you pick up a book, has no title, it says Tales, and you start reading, and it was the same thing about Moses and you never heard of him. It was the same thing about going out to fight for romantic love, to slay dragons. You don't think dragons are real. Even those who would now read dragons read it as being not real myth, as useful symbolism of evil. In the same way that the same people within their own cultural religious context would take the idea of evil as being personified into a Lucifer or Satan or just demonic forces, evil forces against which we all must struggle. As long as you will buy into which we all must struggle, you have got the critical element. You're sane, you're ordinary, you might be a pillar of salt. No, society. So you're mixing up your Old Testament stories again. I warned you. Well, I've warned you a lot about that. The dragons are always a form of the Ten Commandments. The dragons are always seen as a critical element by the ordinary. That if you're going to undertake a great mythical quest, like a knight, and that's been used not just in Europe during the age of Arthur, but as you know, all over the world. In the Far East, they use stories of mystical warriors, the ninjas and people that, fighters, but you're supposed to suspect that the fighters weren't actually engaged, and the samurais originally were some sort of spiritual warrior, not an actual warrior. Then later they may have become that. Well, they're always mythical. But they've got to have something against which to struggle. The ordinary mind won't hear it. And that's why the myth cannot survive. That's why if there is such a thing as secret knowledge, it cannot survive with the ordinary mind, because there's nothing to bounce it off of. It is ordinary run-of-the-mill mystics attempting to play handball, and they can't find a wall. You end up playing some kind of strange baseball. Every time trying to play racquetball, you hit it, and it's a home run. It's gone. You keep waiting for it to come back. Nothing comes back. That is getting close to the real way of a mystic, a real one, which is why you never hear of it. Because you say, "Are you a mystic?" It's worse than the guy not answering. It could be. I don't know. I can start twisting this around. It's like he keeps walking, you think, and later you think, did he say something? And that's too late. The mind tries to hit a ball, trying to play handball, mystical handball, transcendental handball. We're talking serious handball. But if you know how to do it, you hit it and it never comes back. But if you do that to an ordinary person, what are they going to do? Once or twice, maybe. Twice. They're going to say, "Hey, what the hell is this? Hello? What the hell is this?" You have got to have the critical element. You have got to believe that if you're going out to pursue some quest, there's got to be something stand between you and the quest. A dragon, an ogre, Satan, false worship, cross-dressers. I'm not going to say attorneys. I already said ogres. You have got to believe that dragons are worthy of assault. You have got to believe that there is something standing between you and the quest. Or else you literally, the reason you laugh, some of you, is literally, I just pulling them out as fast as I could talk almost, you are attempting to play racquetball or handball. And you go in and you think, well, I've got the interest, I've got some idea, I've heard terms about it, and I'm trying my best. I'm going to cut down on food, I'm going to quit drinking, I'm going to quit doing so-and-so. I'm going to take every commandment I ever heard about, not just the 10 of the Christianity, but anything else I've ever heard, I'm going to try them. And you go, pow! That's why it's secret. That's why you never hear of it. Because there are none of humanity says, we believe there's some kind of, or somebody will say, I believe there's some kind of great conspiratorial, mystical, transcendental, or whatever the hell they call it, New Age or some kind of stuff that's been around for thousands of years. I am just sure of it, by God. I'm just sure they're out there. And I want you people to know it, that I'm wise to you. You hear me? And whoever does it, it's like they throw out a book, a challenge, which, if you understand, is kind of similar to, trying to hang out your thing at God, like, hey, watch this. And you wait for God to get you, and you keep waiting. Is they throw out the challenge of, wait a minute, I believe there's something great and secret going on. Yes, but the real one has no wall. It never comes back. If some guy does make the challenge, if some guy does holler or writes a book, or you understand, you can do it inside just of you. Oh, wait a minute, I know that there's something going on. You don't distract me with all this. There's some kind of great secret thing that's a conspiracy. And there's even people, I'm sure by now, that say, wait a minute, even the kind of mystical activity going on, there are even people that probably by now think that I'm doing it. All you are, you're a shield to cover up for what's really going on. Because sometimes you try to make it sound like there's nothing going on. That's the very kind of thing the conspiracy would do, right? Right. They throw out the challenge, either literally to the world, such as a book or a statement, or they try to start some kind of crusade like, a newsletter or something. They're always around. There's a conspiracy going on, that there is some kind of secret thing going on, or people trying to run the world or doing something. All these Moses and Jesuses and Buddhas, all that stuff doesn't fool me. There was something else going on in there. And they throw out the challenge. In other words, a guy, let's say he's staying right now in some public forum or buys TV time, and he says, I know there's people out there listening to me now that are involved with this. I want you to know that at least there's one person on this planet that knows what you people are doing. I know it by God, you don't fool me. I absolutely know it as sure as I'm here. And he waits. Now, he will hear from somebody, probably. Somebody as equally as cracked as he is. Well, it's harmless. But insofar as him hearing from the conspiracy, let's say there is one. You do know that that's what I meant by... The real one's not ever going to come back. Because the real one, myths have no wall. There is no back wall out there. There is no dragon. There is no basis for criticism of man. There is no tablets to write upon which to write the 10 Commandments. And if it is, when it bounces back, if it's commandments of some sort, if it's any kind of response, now you're dealing with fact. Now you're dealing with low-rent Moses. Now you're dealing with a faux Jesus. Now you're dealing with a Buddha in diapers. You're not dealing with the real thing. If it responds, it's not the real thing. Back to one person, in you. How can you ever make yourself move should be the question if you followed into this. If you go past the point, which you've got to, that wait a minute, something's wrong with me. And for me to go, and your nervous system goes, wait a minute, you don't know what I was going to say. No, wait, no, there's some specifics in me. Oh boy, this will be real interesting. No, really, wait, let me tell you, because there are probably some unique things in me. I mean, they're yucky. I wouldn't normally tell anybody, but you seem so perceptive. I'll tell you, how could I be so lucky? How are you going to do it to you? If you're not dinging myth to yourself, if you're dinging absolute fact, whatever this says is fact, you're not doing anything. You're running up and down a mountain maybe. Instead of Moses, you might as well dig up the ideas. Sisyphus. Your Moses running halfway up the mountain, and before you can get up there, it's like, you got to get to the top of the mountain before the day's over to have a mystical experience. For 60 years, he gets within feet, just a few feet to the top of the mountain. If he can just get there, and the sun bed, suddenly it's nightfall and he falls back down. That's the kind of mystical experience you have, as long as you believe that there's something between you and that, which there is. But the trick is, it's what you think it is. Is the tape gone? Well, if it's over, I guess now I'll tell you, before we started taping, everybody, you was interested why I had you write WB in your palm. Not Lauderdale, and not West, but the WB, because now you're supposed to look and go, it's not WB, that's West Palm. Before the show, I had everybody write, if you remember, let's get it straight. You were supposed to, you were supposed to put WG, so that when the tape ran out, when I finally got to the climactic point, which was, well, of course you missed it. Well, dear, did I hurt you? No, why? Well, you moved. See, that's how you missed the climactic point. But anyway, well, now it can be revealed. The point is, if you'll all look now, those of you that played along, and you look now, the WG on your palm, we gone.